Have you ever wondered what goes through the mind of a pilot when the engines stop working mid-air? What would you do if you were aboard a flight that suddenly faced a life-or-death situation? From engines suddenly failing to respond to planes flying through thunderstorms resulted in something extremely terrifying. Here are some of the craziest emergency landings that saved lives. The Gimli glider incident in July 1983, Air Canada Flight 143, a Boeing 767, took off from Montreal to Edmonton with 69 people on board. Little did anyone know, this routine flight would turn into one of the most iconic and unusual emergency landings in aviation history. What happened? The aircraft, due to a series of miscalculations, ran out of fuel mid-flight at 41,000 feet. Imagine sitting on a plane, feeling a sense of calm, only to hear that the engines have completely shut down. What would you do? The story gets even more intense. With no power, Captain Robert Pearson and First Officer Maurice Quintal had to rely on their glider flying skills to navigate the powerless jet. Luckily, Pearson had gliding experience, something rare among commercial pilots. But where would they land? The closest airstrip was Gimli, an old Air Force base that had been repurposed as a drag racing track. Yes, a racetrack. The pilots had to avoid spectators on the ground, land without engine thrust, and keep the plane intact. It was a heart-stopping descent, but thanks to skill and nerves of steel, the Gimli glider touched down without any fatalities. The passengers walked away from what could have been a disaster. United Airlines Flight 232. Now let's move to July 1989. United Airlines Flight 232. A DC-10 aircraft was making its way from Denver to Chicago when the unthinkable happened. An engine explosion that severed all hydraulic controls. You see, aircraft are designed with multiple layers of safety, but this was one scenario no one had planned for. Captain Al Haynes and his crew were left flying an uncontrollable aircraft with only the power of the remaining engines. In the cockpit, it was a desperate struggle to maintain control. They were essentially steering the plane using the engine thrust alone. If you think this sounds impossible, you wouldn't be alone. This terrifying situation led to an emergency landing at Sioux Gateway Airport in Iowa, but the odds were stacked against them. As they approached the runway, the aircraft came in too fast and the landing gear collapsed. The plane skidded across the tarmac and broke into pieces. Despite the chaos, 185 of the 296 passengers survived. Haynes credited the teamwork in the cockpit and the excellent work of the flight attendants for saving lives that day. Flight 232 remains a textbook example of how crew resource management can save lives, even in the direst circumstances. Miracle on the Hudson, US Airways Flight 1549. January 2009, New York City. US Airways Flight 1549 had just taken off from LaGuardia Airport, bound for Charlotte, North Carolina. Within minutes, the aircraft collided with a flock of geese, causing both engines to fail. What would you do if you were the pilot of a plane, losing altitude fast, with one of the most densely populated cities beneath you? Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger and First Officer Jeffrey Skiles had mere moments to make life or death decisions. The nearest airports were too far, and the only option left was the Hudson River. But landing on water is notoriously tricky. Sullenberger, with decades of flying experience, calmly made the decision and executed a perfect water landing. All 155 passengers and crew were safely evacuated from the sinking plane, standing on the wings in the freezing river, waiting for rescue boats. The Miracle on the Hudson is one of the most famous emergency landings in modern aviation history. Sully's cool-headedness and swift action turned what could have been an unimaginable disaster into an inspiring tale of survival. British Airways Flight 9 into the ash cloud. June 1982. British Airways Flight 9 was en route from Kuala Lumpur to Perth when the Boeing 747 flew into a massive volcanic ash cloud over Indonesia. Unbeknownst to the crew, Mount Galunggung had erupted, spewing ash high into the atmosphere. Within minutes, all 4 engines failed. Picture this. A Boeing 747, the Queen of the Skies, with nearly 250 people on board, falling through the sky with no engine power. What would go through your mind in that situation? Captain Eric Moody and his crew quickly assessed the situation, realizing they were in a perilous position. The volcanic ash had clogged the engines, causing them to flame out. Despite the overwhelming odds, the crew remained calm. They knew they had to get out of the ash cloud if there was any hope of restarting the engines. As they descended, the cabin filled with the smell of sulfur, and many passengers prepared for the worst. But as the aircraft cleared the ash cloud, the crew managed to restart 3 of the 4 engines and eventually made a safe landing in Jakarta. The incident highlighted the dangers of volcanic ash to aircraft and led to changes in how air traffic controllers handle flights near active volcanoes. Qantas Flight 32, the Airbus, a 380 emergency, November 2010. Qantas Flight 32. An Airbus A380, the largest passenger plane in the world, was flying from Singapore to Sydney when disaster struck. Just 4 minutes after takeoff, one of the plane's 4 Rolls-Royce engines exploded, sending shrapnel through critical systems, disabling controls and causing fuel leaks. Imagine being on one of the safest, most advanced planes ever built, and suddenly the unimaginable happens. How do you safely land such a massive aircraft with so much damage? Captain Richard de Crespini and his crew were faced with a nearly impossible task. They had to handle over 60 different system failures while keeping the plane stable. Even the backup systems were compromised. After an intense 90 minutes in the air, where every second was crucial, they managed to return to Singapore and land the crippled A380 safely. The aftermath revealed just how severe the damage was. The aircraft was deemed irreparable. But despite the chaos, there were no injuries. The successful landing of Qantas. Flight 32 has been hailed as a testament to the skills of the pilots and crew, and it reaffirmed the incredible engineering behind the Airbus A380. TACA Flight 110, gliding through a thunderstorm. In May 1988, TACA Flight 110 was on its way from Belize City to New Orleans when it flew into a violent thunderstorm. Both of the Boeing 737's engines were knocked out by heavy rain and hail, with no power and visibility almost zero. Captain Carlos Dardano and his crew had to figure out how to land the powerless aircraft. Imagine being in the middle of a fierce storm, with torrential rain pounding the windows and knowing that your engines have failed. How do you find a place to land when the airport is miles away? Captain Dardano, known for his exceptional flying skills, spotted a levee near a canal in eastern New Orleans and decided to attempt a landing there. With no thrust and the plane rapidly losing altitude, he executed a perfect emergency landing on a grassy field. The aircraft stopped just short of the water. Incredibly, all passengers and crew survived the ordeal without serious injuries. This incident demonstrated not only the incredible capabilities of the Boeing 737, but also the calm, collected leadership of Captain Dardano, who turned a potentially catastrophic situation into an unforgettable success story. Japan Airlines Flight 123, a heroic fight for control. On August 12, 1985, Japan Airlines Flight 123 experienced a catastrophic failure when a rear pressure bulkhead burst, causing the loss of hydraulic controls and decompression of the cabin. The Boeing 747 was on its way from Tokyo to Osaka, carrying 524 people. What followed was the deadliest single aircraft accident in history. But for more than 30 minutes, the crew fought against all odds to keep the plane airborne. Captain Masami Takahama and First Officer Yutaka Sasaki were faced with an almost impossible situation. The aircraft became uncontrollable, constantly pitching up and down as it lost altitude. Despite their heroic efforts to stabilize the plane, they were unable to find a safe place to land. Tragically, the aircraft crashed into a mountain near Mount Takamagahara, and only 4 survivors were found. The crash of Japan Airlines Flight 123 led to widespread changes in aviation safety, particularly concerning maintenance procedures, but the courage and tenacity of the crew in the face of overwhelming odds remain a haunting legacy of the disaster. Southwest Airlines Flight 1380, Heroism at 30,000 feet. April 2018, Southwest Airlines Flight 1380 was cruising at 32,000 feet when one of its engines suddenly exploded, causing debris to hit the aircraft and shatter a window. The rapid decompression that followed was terrifying for everyone on board. What do you do when part of your aircraft is torn apart mid-flight? Captain Tammy Jo Schultz, a former Navy fighter pilot, quickly took control of the situation. She had to descend the aircraft rapidly while maintaining calm in the cabin. Despite the chaos, she and her co-pilot Darren Ellisor made a successful emergency landing in Philadelphia. Tragically, 1 passenger lost their life, but the rest was saved thanks to the swift actions of the crew. Captain Schultz's calm demeanor and precise handling of the emergency were praised globally, showing once again how vital it is to have skilled professionals in the cockpit. Eastern Airlines Flight 401, the importance of paying attention. One of the most bizarre accidents in aviation history involves Eastern Airlines Flight 401. On December 29, 1972, the Lockheed L-1011 was on approach to Miami International Airport when the crew became preoccupied with a malfunctioning landing gear indicator light. As they attempted to troubleshoot the issue, they failed to notice that the autopilot had disengaged, causing the aircraft to slowly descend. By the time the crew realized what was happening, it was too late. The plane crashed into the Florida Everglades, killing 101 of the 176 people on board. What makes this story particularly tragic is that the landing gear itself was working perfectly fine. The crash was entirely preventable if the crew had maintained better situational awareness. The disaster of Flight 401 led to significant changes in the way crews are trained to prioritize tasks and avoid becoming fixated on a single issue while flying. Today it remains a cautionary tale about the importance of attention and communication in the cockpit. Korean Air Flight 801, the danger of complacency. Not all emergencies stem from mechanical failures or extraordinary situations. Sometimes complacency can lead to disaster. On August 6, 1997, Korean Air Flight 801, a Boeing 747, was on final approach to Guam's Antonio B-1 Pat International Airport. The weather was poor and visibility was limited due to heavy rain, but the crew believed they could land using the airport's instrument landing system, ILS. Unfortunately, the ILS had been out of service for several weeks, something the crew failed to fully register. As they descended, their focus waned, and they became disoriented in the low visibility conditions. Despite warnings from the plane's ground proximity warning system, the pilots failed to adjust their course in time, and the aircraft slammed into a hillside. Of the 254 people on board, 228 tragically lost their lives. The subsequent investigation revealed that pilot error, coupled with poor communication and a reliance on malfunctioning equipment, led to the crash The crash resulted in sweeping changes in the way airlines manage cockpit procedures during adverse weather conditions, as well as improvements to air navigation systems. Have you ever experienced a tense moment on a flight, or heard of other acts of bravery in the sky? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next video, where we'll explore even more fascinating facts from around the world. Thanks for watching, and stay safe out there.